December 15th, 1978 marks the release of Richard Donner's acclaimed Superman. This was the gold standard for superhero movies for generations. It wasn't followed up adequately in my opinion until X-Men and Spider-Man in the early 2000s, and more on those later. The production of these four films are famously disastrous, leading to multiple versions of the first two films, extensive reshoots, career fallouts, lawsuits a dozen, and so much more. That's just amazing to read about. Despite all of the production problems and how they affected the films, I still personally hold the stance that perhaps the thing even more disastrous brought on by this film is the depiction of Superman himself. Credit where due, there is a clear love and respect for the source material brought in by Donner in these first two films, but I think that the conception that Superman is overpowered and boring and unrelatable largely stems from the faults and failures of this film. It stems from this pop culture portrayal that stages Superman first as Superman and not Clark Kent. The point that I'm starting to bring home is that I think when written at his best, Superman is first a man raised by the lowly Kents who can teach us about how to use the power that we are presented with for good. Superman is not great because of the power that he can wield, he is great because he chooses to do good despite the power that he wields. While this original film brought much of the aesthetic of Superman to iconic heights between the music and performances and special effects, it also pulled Superman away from the empathetic core that makes him who he is, in my opinion, or at least the best version of himself. We've had to sit through generations of dull Supermen with no real internal conflict, no compass for morality, and no parameters on his power. Of course, this makes for a really dull character, and I can't blame anyone for not really enjoying him. In 2002, director Sam Raimi picked up most of the pieces that Superman laid down and he ran with them. The Spider-Man films were a new peak in comic book movie writing, and honestly, they may have only been matched a few times since. There are funny references to Superman throughout the film, paying tribute to those who came before.
You do too much. You're not Superman, you know.
But I think that this character holds a much more intimate place in people's hearts because of the deep internal, external, and philosophical conflicts richly explored. In our society, superheroes are effectively the equivalent of the Greek gods. They are cultural touchstones to certain values, morals, and ideas, or at least they should be, in my opinion. There's nothing wrong with having a film just be fun, but I think that there's so much more worthwhile to get out of these films, and that is why I am really happy to be talking about James Gunn's Superman. From my perspective, I think that Gunn's Superman in 2025 is definitely the best Superman movie ever made. There are technical elements like the score and the title sequence especially that are still better in the original, but at its heart, I believe that the production quality of Gunn's film is far sturdier and more consistent, definitely, and the character writing is leagues above. In several of my videos on this channel about writing adaptations, I've brought up Gunn's philosophy on how he greenlights projects inside his DCU. I really agree with his sentiment that superhero fatigue just comes down to poorly written films. We all love the superhero movies that have a really strong screenplay. The screenplay is the very heart of a story, and no film can be good despite the director if it's attached to a poor script. So how is the screenplay for James Gunn's Superman? While not a perfect film at all, I think that Gunn's Superman does a great job of recontextualizing the character of Clark Kent, first as a man who just wants to do good. He just happens to have these great powers. This film is a vessel for empathy, a lesson in how to exercise your abilities for good, and a thematic wrestle between the legalities of good and evil. But on top of all of that, it's just a fun comic book movie, which is very important. Many of the core conflicts in this film are surprisingly similar to those in Batman vs. Superman. Superman is put under scrutiny for interfering in foreign warfare outside the jurisdiction of the United States. In Batman vs. Superman, we're subjected to a tedious courtroom drama where Superman just kind of sags his head and mops off to Lois afterwards. But here in Gunn's version, we see him genuinely upset that he can't just do what he sees to be right. He's annoyed that good actions have to be filtered through these governmental checks when lives are in danger. While the point is the same, the presentation is far more relatable and human than that in The Man of Steel or Batman vs. Superman. I believe that any film's quality is dependent on presentation, not subject. It doesn't matter so much to me what you're going to say with your film, but how you say it. And the separation between these two films really emphasize that. Clark is given a real internal conflict to wrestle with, and as other characters have their own perspectives on justice and who can decide what is right and when to act, This forces the audience to reckon with the same questions in themselves, because we relate. Another familiar aspect, which again I was surprised by, was the fact that Lex Luthor is back on a real estate dominance mission, much like in the 1978 film. But while that feels detached and strange in that original film, this entire movie is about the conflict between serving or controlling others. A lot of the pieces that we've seen in this film are familiar, but it has the strongest through line and contextualization for all of the pieces that we've ever seen on the big screen. It even manages to address many of the tropes of Superman without feeling obligated to fulfill them in the same way. For instance, the majority of the B-plots in all 4 of these original films center around Lois coming to realize that Clark and Superman are one and the same. The first interaction we see between Clark and Lois in this new film takes place at the Daily Planet, where she questions Clark on how he keeps getting interviews with Superman. It's played as if she doesn't know his secret identity, but in the next scene it's just revealed that they were pulling each other's legs in public. This sort of friction helps the relationship feel organic, but it also helps to leave space for the B-plots to tread new ground while also scratching that itch in their dynamic for at least a brief moment, because it's what we've come to know from the characters. This film makes consistent choices to show that it's not just about the spectacle and the action. Presenting Clark's conflict about foreign affairs in an argument was the ideal decision. Another example is a moment between Clark and Guy Gardner just after a reveal occurs that paints Superman in a bad light before Metropolis. Where in countless other comic book movies we've seen the heroes just brawl it out after a misunderstanding, as was the case in Batman vs. Superman, here Guy comes in and genuinely just asks if what they were told was true. I'm in love with the fact that the most engaging action scenes in this film are just dialogues, arguments, fights. It allows for the characters to feel more three-dimensional, for the violence to have more impact, it opens the door for more empathy, and the characters feel a lot smarter as a byproduct. The encapsulation of this idea, in my opinion, comes in a late second act turning point when Superman takes a breather and laments the fact that Krypto was taken by Lex. In the background of the scene, the Justice Gang is fighting a creature in the middle of Metropolis, and Superman tells Lois that they have it handled. He would rather spend a moment with her as they talk about their favorite music and ultimately get down to what is bothering Clark so much. Lois questions Clark why he is so concerned, suggesting that he's just a dog. Clark responds with what is my favorite line from the film, which this may not be verbatim because I've only seen it once, but essentially he says, yeah, and he's not even a good dog, but he's out there and he's probably scared. The framing of the scene intentionally shows that the action is not the focus. The heart of Superman is. The film is more concerned with giving these characters a moment, with fleshing out Clark's good heart, than it is about leveling Metropolis in a third act CGI nightmare against General Zod. This film has a sense of real actor chemistry, which has rarely been seen in a superhero film in this way since that Raimi trilogy, and it makes it feel like a real movie, and I'm so thankful. The tangible sets, practical makeup, mostly in-camera action goes a long way in helping this also. To wind back some, to be clear, this film isn't completely absent of a third act CGI bonanza. I do think that it tried to go a little bit too large in scale than it really needed to, because its heart is very intimate and small scale, which is appropriate positioning, especially for the start of a new series of films. Despite the scale of that spectacle, of the story threads, of the character roster, I do find myself appreciating the justification for each of these decisions. While there are several glaring moments of convenience, like when Lex breaks into the Fortress of Solitude for the first time, and the scene around Metamorpho, and a lot of the plot bunny trails all over the place, all of these decisions do end up tying back into the overall plot logically, and there really aren't any spare pieces that don't fit into the overall puzzle. There's a strong sense of setup and payoff here, as is usually the case for James Gunn, and that's one reason I really like his writing. There's very good intentionality behind all of the decisions. So some of the scenes may still not be my favorite feeling in the moment, but I come to not hate those scenes just because I realize that they were necessary in getting to the point that James Gunn is making. At the end of the day, they work for the plot mechanically. I think one thing that's important to recognize is how this film manages to flesh out Superman and the philosophy that he lives by. The conflict in this film is not a binary street between good and evil, between Superman and Lex Luthor. While yes, they are on opposite ends of the core conflict in this film, my favorite piece of the puzzle is the positioning of the Justice Gang, 3 members consisting of Guy Gardner, Hawk Girl, and Mr. Terrific. This trio are also heroes. They're serving Metropolis. They're fighting right alongside Superman. But they do not have the reverence for life. They don't have the golden hearts. They don't have the undying servitude that Clark does. As they interact, you can see the difference in how they want to solve problems. When Superman wants to first subdue and then preserve the giant kaiju storming through Metropolis for the sake of research, the Justice Gang are far happier to just annihilate it and take care of the problem that way. While on the same side of the overall conflict, the juxtaposition brought out by their differences does a better and far more impactful job than just the distinction between Superman and Lex ever could. Few of us as audience members are ever going to be as devilish as Lex Luthor, but I bet most of us would be thinking along the sides of the Justice Gang, which is why the values of Clark really shine out through this film. It's a much gentler but a very specific contrast. Always have at least 3 points of contact like this in your moral, philosophical, or thematic conflict. That's how you get really good writing. I don't know that it's worth going down my whole laundry list of nitpicks with the film because the core of it is really good, relatable, lightly challenging, and very fun, which again, being fun as a comic book movie is of huge importance. You can't just be overly serious and try to be meaningful. It has to be a fun movie. The foundation is super strong here, and I think this level of character depth is exactly where all superhero movies should be, so we can mine more worth out of the characters. I really like James Gunn's philosophy about greenlighting films in his DCU based off of their screenplays, and so far, I really think it's paying off. Seeing the political discourse around this film is really interesting to me because I think that the film never tries too hard to be explicitly relevant to modern politics. I think that this is a byproduct of a well-written film with real characters that are challenged by situations that question moral standards. This relatability, the real-world application, and thus the values that can be drawn from the figure of Superman, that's exactly what superheroes should be. That's what stories should be. Let's bring the values back into superhero movies. I would recommend this movie wholeheartedly, and I'm really excited for what James Gunn has next. Thanks for watching this episode, guys. If you enjoyed it or found it informative, consider giving it a like and subscribing and ring that little bell notification so that you know when I post next. If you thought the video could have been better though, leave me some constructive criticisms in the comments below and leave it a thumbs down. Until next time, guys, I'll see you later.